like I said, we were all kind of laughing. The phone was on speaker, but we were muted, so she couldn't hear us. And, he said, like, this does sound crazy, doesn't it? And I think I said, yes, it does.
That was former White House aide Hope Hicks testifying to the House January 6th committee, recalling when President Trump concluded that a certain woman's claims about the 2020 election sounded crazy. Tucker Carlson, before he got fired from Fox News, called the same woman an unguided missile, dangerous as hell, and a crazy person. And those are just the words I can repeat on television. Mr. Trump and Mr. Carlson were both talking about Sidney Powell, the former election lawyer who is at the center of Trump's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. And despite believing her to be crazy and dangerous as hell and an unguided missile, Fox News, and more importantly, President Trump, ran with her ideas. Less than 2 weeks after Trump lost the election to Joe Biden, Powell joined Rudy Giuliani and others to claim, without evidence, that the socialist government of Venezuela and Hugo Chavez, who had been dead for almost a decade at that point, that they interfered in the 2020 election. China, according to Powell, was also part of that plot.
What we are really dealing with here and uncovering more by the day is the massive influence of communist money through Venezuela, Cuba, and likely China in the interference with our elections here in the United States.
3 years later, it still boggles the mind. But even after Powell went public with that wackadoodle theory, Trump considered making Sidney Powell a special counsel to investigate election fraud. That happened during an infamous White House meeting in December of 2020, a meeting that Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, and others, colloquially known as Team Crazy, that they tried to have in secret with President Trump. In that meeting, Powell and others raised the prospect of seizing voting machines from key counties and deploying the National Guard to potentially rerun the 2020 election. White House lawyers and staffers, colloquially known as Team Normal, they had no idea that meeting was taking place, but the second they learned about it, they ran as fast as they could to put a stop to it. Powell herself later testified to the January 6th committee, while sipping on a Diet Dr. Pepper, it should be noted, that during that meeting, she also told Trump about findings pointing to security flaws in Dominion voting machines. She said the president was very interested in the information that apparently nobody else had bothered to inform him of. And because of these statements and many other things Sidney Powell has said, she is being sued, not by one, but by two companies that provided election software to the U.S. during the 2020 election, Dominion and Smartmatic. Ms. Powell has now admitted that many of her claims were false. And today, she pleaded guilty to 6 misdemeanor charges of election interference in Georgia related to her quest to try to help Trump stay in power, specifically her role in breaching voting machine equipment in Coffee County, Georgia.
Can you please state your true and correct legal name?
Sidney Catherine Powell.
How do you plead to the 6 counts of conspiracy to commit intentional interference with performance of election duties?
Guilty.
As part of the deal she reached with Georgia prosecutors, Powell will receive 6 years probation and must pay a $6,000 fine. Most importantly, though, her plea deal requires her to testify truthfully at the trials of any of the other Georgia co-defendants, including Donald Trump. So now that Sidney Powell is talking in Georgia, what does that mean for Donald Trump or for his co-defendants on Team Crazy, Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman? And more to the point, what does it mean for Jack Smith, the special counsel who is overseeing the federal election subversion case against Donald Trump? Joining me now are Anna Bauer, legal fellow and courts correspondent for Lawfare, and Neal Katyal, former acting solicitor general. Thank you both for being here. Anna, let me just ask you first, given the sort of timeline here, Powell's trial was supposed to begin effectively Friday or Monday. What do you think happened here to precipitate this plea deal?
Right. So we are on the eve of trial. Ken Chesebro's trial, of course, is still set to start tomorrow as 450 jurors are set to come into Fulton County to fill out their jury questionnaires. And it's not unusual for defendants to, settle or strike a plea deal on the eve of trial. So in some sense, this isn't all that surprising. We saw earlier in the week that after weeks of Sidney Powell arguing that she, didn't have anything to do with the allegations related to the breach of voting systems in Coffee County, or that it was authorized if she did, Judge McAfee handed down a series of orders in which he struck down some of her arguments that she'd made to dismiss those charges based on those types of arguments. So I think that it seems like this was something that happened very quickly. It happened after Judge McAfee kind of handed down those legal defeats. So I think that it made sense. It was a cost-benefit analysis for Sidney Powell. These are some of the, most serious charges that any of these defendants were facing because it involves computer trespass. So when she was looking at 7 felonies and possible, prison time, I think that she just made a calculation that this is what she should have done.
Yeah, Trump v. jail. The choice isn't maybe that hard. Neal, Trump's attorney seems confident that Powell's testimony, quote, will be favorable to my overall defense strategy. If Trump is on record saying Sidney Powell sounded crazy, does that in any way diminish her utility as a witness?
No, I think she's going to be a devastating witness. So first of all, I think this is probably the legally smartest decision that Sidney Powell has ever made in her entire career. And I can't say I think much of Sidney Powell's legal acumen, but for once, I got to commend her for making the right legal choice, because it was a no-brainer for her. If the case had gone to trial, I think it would have gone about as well as her challenges to the 2020 election. In a way, I do think I disagree a little bit with Anna. I do think this is still surprising because no-brainers are exactly what Sidney Powell kind of would reject. She wasn't really part of the reality-based community for many years, but now has joined it. To me, Alex, the most significant thing, it's not the plea, it's to 6 misdemeanors. What Sidney Powell did was unforgivable. It's not a misdemeanor. There's only one reason I think that the prosecutors would give her such a light plea deal, and it's because she's got significant testimony. And if I'm Trump or Trump's lawyer right now, the thing I'm most worried about, it's not just that she agreed to testify truthfully and all that in future proceedings. It's that last night she recorded a videotape of testimony that was turned over to the prosecutors, and part of this plea agreement requires her not to talk about it with anyone, other defendants, the media, you, me, whomever. So that tape is, I think of significant interest, and Trump can say all he wants about her diminished credibility. But remember, as you just said in your earlier clip, Alex, Trump tried to make her special counsel over the entire thing. So good luck with that one, Mr. Trump.
Anna, when we talk about Ken Chesebro, his trial is, as of right now, full steam ahead. Do you get any sense that there is some buyer's remorse on asking for this speedy trial if you're Ken Chesebro, given he's the cheese stands alone, as it were?
I'm not quite sure yet, Alex. I reached out earlier today to Chesebro's attorneys. They were not yet prepared to comment. I will say that this was something that I think took everyone off guard, including, multiple defense attorneys. So I think that they were taking some time to process this news. But, Ken Chesebro has a very different case than Sidney Powell did. He had previously asked to be severed from Sidney Powell. He wanted to stand alone, and indeed the cheese is now standing alone, and I think that there's potential upside for him there, because some of the more serious allegations about Coffee County will maybe have less of a spotlight in this upcoming trial, so maybe he can try to minimize the seriousness of that now that he's no longer standing next to Sidney Powell. But all is quiet in terms of that legal team at the moment, and we're all kind of wondering, where they'll go from here.
What is this? How does this affect Jack Smith's case? Neal, she's one of the unnamed co-conspirators in that case.
Yeah, I suspect very much Sidney Powell tried to do a global deal with the local and federal prosecutors. You'd almost, in every circumstance, want to do that. And I suspect Jack Smith said no. And, we're just reading the tea leaves here, but probably the reason is Smith required her to plead guilty to a felony. And that was something that Georgia prosecutors weren't insisting upon. Now, anything that she says in Georgia, including on that videotape or in future proceedings, Jack Smith can, of course, introduce. So there's a way in which Jack Smith gets to have his cake and eat it too, should he decide to go after her, as I suspect that he will. So I think one thing to worry about is just kind of where Powell's testimony will go. But another thing, if you're Trump, that you're scared about is this now the start of a domino effect? I mean, we know in conspiracy cases, I wrote a whole Yale Law Journal article about it, how once one person starts to plead and flip, others generally follow. And there are 17 others that may follow. And so, Trump has to worry not just about Powell, but about everyone else.